Hi, I'm Greg of the Real G Pops Workshop. In today's video, I'm going to give you my take on how to make a tote rack for 27-gallon totes. This is my first time making one of these, but I did learn some tips and tricks I'd like to pass along, and I also solved one of the biggest problems that makers have when it comes to making these racks. How do you get rid of saggy totes? So stick around to the end and I'll solve that as well as another dilemma when we get there. Let's take a look. So today I set out to answer a question that has plagued mankind for millennia. What can I build with 21 2x4s, about 300 screws, and about half a dozen casters, but no glue? Let's find out. So I start out by milling 1 3/4 by 1 3/4 by 28.5 pieces of 2x4 that will be used as the rails for the tote rack that I'm building. As you can see here, the 7 2x4s turned into 40 1 3/4. They multiply quickly. Now to make these a little more decorative, I added a 45-degree angle on both ends. If I had this to do over, I would probably just do one end, as one side will be up against the wall the way I am going to use it. This also meant that I had to pre-drill 80 holes, so when I mount them, the wood would not split. Because these need to be very uniform, one last pass through the planer was actually necessary. Keeps the measurements nice and crisp. So with the first portion of the build out of the way, now it's time to turn my attention to the 14 remaining 2x4s. Now they needed to be sent through the planer so that they too could be nice and crispy. These of course came from the big box store, which means they needed a little attention. You know what I mean. So this rack is going to be specific to the totes that you get from Big Orange. So the dimensions are going to differ if you got them from somewhere else. So with all the milling out of the way, this becomes a bit repetitious. So to save some time, I created some spacers to certain dimensions, and these create the gaps between the totes and the spaces between the rails. And you can tweak these if someone wants to build this, make it a little closer, make it a little tighter. I use these measurements, one, because they fit and they're aesthetically pleasing. So at the bottom, I use a 12.5-inch spacer, and that's going to be for the lowest tote. And I'll use a 15.25-inch spacer for the remaining totes. This particular build is going to hold 20 totes in total. We're going to go 4 across and 5 high. You can change the dimensions to fit whatever your space dictates. Since this is my first time building anything like this, I took actual dimensions off the totes that I purchased so that I could space them out the way I wanted them. I've seen plenty of builds, and I've seen that some people might like them nice and tight, some people want to spread them out, some people like to do it low, some build them very tall. So you can do whatever your space dictates, but I kind of made this specific for my space and made some of the measurements as I was moving along. So what we're doing basically is creating a ladder, and the one thing about a ladder is it needs to be square. So especially when you first start off, make sure that first rung is square and the rest should fall into line. And you do kind of get a bit of a rhythm. I got to where I just put the screws in place, and as I moved down, screwed them down, kind of sped the process up a bit. I also put a screw into the center of the 45-degree angle. That was just to add a little security and a little strength. And no, none of them split. At this point, I had left the rails long, but as you can see, I chose to leave 4 inches at the top, and that was where the top of the last tote will reside. So this is the finished product. It's 84.5 inches tall, and that is one down. 2 of these will only have the glides on one side, the rails rather, on one side, and the others 3 will have the rails on both sides. At this point, it's pretty much wash, rinse, repeat. We are going to make our 12.5 space on the bottom, 15.25 as we move up, 4-inch gap on top. Only this time we are going to put the glides, the rails rather, on both sides. So we're going to do that 3 times. So we are creating basically 5 ladders, 2 with rails just on one side. As I said earlier, 3 with rails on both sides. And that will allow us to make a rack for the 20 pieces, the 20 totes. As you can see, again, we talked about getting into a rhythm. The screws, everything moves along rather quickly. Make sure everything is square. We know the height, 84.5 inches. So some of those measurements now can be taken before we even start screwing in the rails. And it does kind of speed up the process because just like that, we are done with our 3 inner rails. So right now we have our 5 pieces. We have the 2 end pieces and the inner rails. And if you know me, I've got to stain them. So this is not a necessary part, but for where I'm going to put these in one of my second garages, it was actually just something that I wanted to do. I've seen a few folks paint theirs, but I wanted to stain it because the color works with what I have going on in that room. And on this particular day, it was 100+ degrees outside. So if you want something to dry quickly, stain it on a 100-degree day. So moving right along, these pieces will be the outer rails. As a one-man show, I've seen people make the boxes and put them together and try to maneuver them. I try to keep the pieces as singular as possible so that I don't have to lift very often. Later you'll see me stand the entire frame up, but I built it one piece at a time other than the ladder as you see right here. So again, making sure everything is square is key, and making sure that this works. I put a lag screw in the middle and some smaller screws next to it. You'll see what those are later. So I took the rack, put it on its side. Again, as a one-man show, I put the bottom rail on, and then I inserted the, lack of a better term, the ladders into it, and then I put the other piece of wood along what will be the bottom here now. Doing a test fit with one of the totes to make sure the spacing is correct, and also for the spacing in between the rails, I created a spacer block as well to ensure uniformity. And that spacer is 20.25 inches long. And as you can see, this is a very repetitive build, so you get into the rhythm with the screws and the spacing, and it does not take long to get this put together. I put some flat L braces on the front corners, 1 to give it a little more rigidity, and 2 to give it a bit of decorative fashion. And the stain turned out very nice, as you can see. So at this point, the frame is technically complete, but nothing's never really complete. got that up without throwing out my back. So this is what it looks like at this point. There are 20 spaces in there. I wanted to do a test fit now that I got it up and running. Make sure there's enough space on that top rail. And they glide right in. They don't rock around. It's nice and snug. It's just enough gap in between there to make it look nice. So at this point, we need to put some wheels on it. But the wheels that I purchased for this, the casters, had not come yet. So I put some quick release casters on here just so I can move it around for this build. So you see me putting these on now. They will be coming off later in this video. But the type of casters that I'm putting on are definitely an option. If you have some of these actually did work. It just wasn't what I had in mind when I was putting this together. I had a different thought, different look. I put 4-inch casters that you'll see later as the permanent wheels for this, but this is just temporary for right now. On the back side, I didn't put the flat L brackets. I actually put a piece of 2x4. And I did this for a couple of reasons too. Once I determined that this was going to be the back, I figured if I needed to screw it into the wall to hold it, I could do that as well. And if not, it's going to be on casters. I can still unscrew it depending on how heavy things are and move it around. Now we're just taking a look at it again. At this point, it is technically complete. I'm going to do a few more enhancements along the way, and we will see those upcoming. Again, this thing turned out very nice. And now I want to get to some of the stars of this show. Again, there's no glue in this, and that was just a personal choice. I've seen people put glue. You can put glue. I just didn't feel the need to. Now, one thing that I wanted to do, because I was gifted some OSB that I needed to get out of my garage, but I wanted to put a top on it because this is going to replace some storage that I have in use now. There's some longer items that do not fit into a tote, but they would fit nicely on top of this rack. So you can use plywood, OSB, whatever you have. I just happened to again have this lying around and wanted to get rid of it. So I'm cutting out something that is just the same size as the top, and I'm going to do a test fit right now just to make sure that it works. And then that way I can take long things I want to store and set them on top of this rack. Now I needed to get rid of all the sawdust I created from cutting that piece because I needed to paint it. And because OSB is prone to swelling around moisture, sealing it was probably one of the best things you can do. And because it's going to be on top of a shelf in a garage, it doesn't have to be pretty, but it doesn't hurt. So once it's installed, I now have a place for additional storage. And it'll help keep the dust off the totes. So that's enhancement number 1. Again, a bit of a test fit. So it's time to fix that saggy tote issue. These totes have a rigid edge. And while I was looking at them, I thought, if I were to put something on there, it would keep it off the bottom. So I grabbed a piece of cardboard, cut out the corner so that I had the precise measurements. Then after measuring the width and the length, cut out a template. I would use that template to make pieces of wood that would fit on the bottom. They would have varying widths and be able to sustain various weights. So with the template complete, of course, you have to dress up your template. You can't just leave it any old way. So I put a little Danish oil on mine. But is this necessary? Of course not. But the way you do anything is the way you do everything. So once I got that milled up, cleaned up, I put a handle on it, counted on some screws, and created the perfect template. Now with that template, I was able to grab all the various scraps I had that met the dimensions and created bottoms for the totes. So because all these scraps had various widths, they would dictate the weight of what I would use each one for. And while you're in the build process, I recommend grabbing as many scraps as you can that fit the dimensions and using that template and cutting out several pieces now. You're already in the build process, and this isn't something that you necessarily want to come back to later. So I looked around, grabbed several pieces of several different widths, like this one. And now this has a strong bottom. This was one of the thicker ones that I used. I found some true scrap. As you can see, this piece of 1/2 inch turned out perfect. Gives just enough rigidity and doesn't need to look pretty. Now sometimes all you need is a thin piece. You're not really going to overload it, but you got more in there than you would like. And depending on how close you have your totes together, you just don't want that bottom sagging. So sometimes this would be enough. And yes, I had a piece of OSB left over after I put the top on. And this too is for one of the heavier needs. But this was just to demonstrate that you can use your scraps to the betterment of your projects. And if you can do it, why not? So I cut up several widths and just have them set to the side. I do have a particular item that's coming up. It weighs about, I think I weighed it, it was about 50 pounds. This is a drill sharpener, and I put it in the tote. Set the piece of wood on the edge, as you see. And again, it's in there, it weighs a little over 50 pounds, and absolutely no sag. And this is perfect for the folks that want to put their totes closer together when they build. I have a nice gap just because I like the way it looks aesthetically. But the tighter you have them, this would come in handy for you. Again, no sag. These corners are very rigid. And now my casters have arrived. So I put 4-inch casters on this as the permanent wheels. I put one on each corner, and I also put one under the center rail. And this is what she looks like loaded up. Now this is the bonus tip. We've all been there. We've seen totes where you have items in there and there's still space left over, but sometimes what you have in there is kind of delicate and you don't want to crush it, but it doesn't come up to the top. And at the end of the day, what a waste. So what I did was cut out some MDF strips. I put some double-sided glue, a little screw on the side, and I cut out, just as I did with the template for the bottom, I took the width and the length at the top of the pieces of wood. I cut the MDF, and now I have a second story. So if you have something in there that doesn't quite meet up to the top, you don't want to crush it, this gives you more room that you can utilize. So with that said, no saggy totes and no crushed items. So I hope you enjoyed it. That was another fun build for me. That was the first. I had never made one of those racks before, but that was enjoyable. It was definitely a good thing to have some blocks made up ahead of time. It helped with the speed because it's a very repetitious build, but I've already been commissioned by a couple of family members to make a few more. So again, once you get one of these under your belt, you will become the resident expert. So hope you enjoyed it. Again, please like, subscribe, comment, and share, and I'll catch you next time.